In Roman Catholic tradition, the confession box is a place where one can confess their sins and dark thoughts to a priest for absolution. The priests are bound by God never to repeat what is said outside the confession box, even if the sin confessed is murder. Otherwise the priest will be sent to eternal damnation. God seems to value the souls of murderers more than the justice of their victims. What was Christ's death for? To pay for the sins of humanity, but you cannot erase the crime. What really does Jesus serve other than as a scapegoat? Someone who takes on all the crimes of humanity so his people can be forgiven. The goat disguised as a shepherd. Why should anyone, regardless of their authority, have the right to forgive the crimes inflicted on others? Should it not be right for the victim to decide if the perpetrator deserves forgiveness or not? How could anyone look at the case of Elizabeth Fritzl, imprisoned in a dungeon for 24 years by her father, who sexually assaulted her multiple times, often in front of the offsprings of the previous attack, and say it is justifiable for her to go through such a torment because she is given eternity in heaven to compensate her? And how can you tell her that her father's actions didn't matter, and he doesn't require forgiveness from Elizabeth, only from God, to be free from the guilt, responsibility of his actions, and forgiven? How? How? I never knew my parents. They died when I was still young. I was raised by my grandparents from a very early age. They sent me to a Catholic grammar school because they were convinced I required structure to improve my education. But I didn't believe in it. The school was a miserable institution to learn and live in. The nuns were strict and rigid as the canes they wielded. The priests would daily drill guilt into the hearts and minds of every pupil, making every thought or desire feel sick, guilty, and morally revolting, and caused us to constantly doubt and hate ourselves. It was like a prison of the mind. If you so much as asked how water could turn into wine, you were given a thrashing across the hands. You were told so many times, never question, but respect. Respect the authority of the priesthood. You'd soon forget your own sense of identity from being told exactly how to act, how to speak, what to love, what to hate, and how to worship. I was caned constantly during my school years. I didn't wish to forget. I dropped my pencil once and was asked by the nun, a woman of 80-something, to come to the front of the room, and she told me, "This is going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you." And I moved my hand from hers just as she was about to hit my palm. "I guess you were right," I said. Since then, I would deliberately get myself into trouble, just to make her thrash her own hand as much as possible. I was never childish enough to just be a nuisance. I wanted really to drive her mad, and would constantly ask questions she couldn't answer, or pressure her with quotations and writers she never heard of. I loved to read, and I would often escape the grounds of the school for a couple of hours each week to a local second-hand bookshop, and swap one book for another, and then swap the previous book for another one. Every other lesson, after I had humiliated her in front of the class, and was asked to come to the front, she'd grip my hand tight, so as I couldn't slip my hand so easily again. Then she'd take a giant swing. Each time she had to cane me, she would increase the force, as if she hoped the next blow would smack some sense into me, and stop my behavior. But occasionally, but not always, I would move my hand and force her to hit her own. I got very bloodied palms in my school days, and I was forced to learn to write with both hands, otherwise I couldn't write my assignments or essays at all. I did not like the fact that she caned me. I wanted her to know how she made me feel, by having her inflict the same pain on herself. I was making the best of a hellish situation. Not the most logical assumption to think I could make a good thing out of something horrendous. But I needed to do something, didn't I? The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. In all honesty, the entire idea of God failed to impress me at the age of 6. The only memory I have of my mother was of her in the garden holding me in her arms on her lap, picking the flowers, ladybirds and butterflies, and giving them to me to grasp, asking me how wonderful the world was, and how lucky we were with the knowledge that God made it in such beautiful colours to appreciate it. I had no knowledge of intelligent design, of Darwin or any natural sciences at the time, but I was instantly struck by how absurd it was to assume that it was God who made everything to suit us rather than the eyes developing to see, or colours in flowers becoming bright and attractive in order to attract insects to them. After I was done embracing the wonders of how the world looked, I thought there was no room for God or necessity for him, so I thought it was more than reasonable to assume he was not there, and to carry on as if my life meant nothing, and to build upon it, whatever I saw fit. My mother had a sweet tenderness towards me. Her hair flew in the wind like a fire in a forest. Her eyes were like the blue sea pearls, and her skin was as soft and pale as snow. My grandparents lived in an old manor house, which was originally a pig's farm. I remember once walking into a pen which my grandfather had forgot to keep a lock on. I would see the stains of blood on the wall, and the old smell of dead pigs still circulated the room. In my dreams I would walk into the pen at night, seeing the pigs all pushed into the corner of the room, as they watched one by one their brothers and sisters being hung from the ceiling, a bucket placed beneath their heads, and a sharp knife cutting the veins in the neck, and seeing the blood pour onto the floor. Since then, I have never been able to walk into a butcher's without hearing that screaming, or seeing buckets full of blood. My grandparents converted the farm into a plant to keep horses. I would go out to the fences with apples and carrots to feed the horses and stroke their coats. Some nights I would sleep in the stables with them. When I was at home for the holidays, my grandmother never minded so long as I had a blanket. My grandfather, I think, thought of it as a cheap equivalent to employing a guard. I preferred staying with those innocent creatures, hearing the noises, rustles they made, and feeling the warmth of their bodies. Even the smell seemed to satisfy me. One horse called Nugget, a large ginger horse, who never tried to bite me like the others did, used to nudge up beside me in the stable. I think it must have thought I was its foal, because the poor thing lost its baby when it was giving birth. What was worse was the vet had to sedate the creature, so it was never even aware that its baby was never alive. I never rode, not until I was about 15, on a beach, on holidays with my grandfather. I never liked to see the Grand National or races. The sight of horses falling over hedges, breaking their backs, and riders dying in the foreground frightened me to death. My days at the farm were the happiest of my childhood. Life in the school was suffocating. Living with a strict routine enforced, night after night, day after day. The same hours would be called for lights out, breakfast, lunch and dinner, wake up at 5 in the morning, go to bed at 8 in the evening. The water was always freezing, the food was served lukewarm and vile, and a lot of the boys would constantly make noise to alleviate their own sense of boredom. I hated sleeping with the other boys, particularly when I kept longing for the stables. I had a few good friends in the boys' dorm. They would often pull pranks, and I felt obliged to try and get them out of them as best I could. My mate Billy Wormhill was probably the worst of the lot. I was once shouted at by Father Wilhelm whilst trying to help Billy. "Why are you climbing on the roof?" "Billy, sir." "Billy? What Billy?" "Billy's on the roof, sir. I'm climbing up to get him down." "Billy! Billy! What are you doing on the roof?" "I'm being saved by Stinch." "Why is he helping you climb down?" "Because I'm stuck on the roof, sir." "Why are you stuck on the roof for?" "I can't get down, sir." "Why can't you get down?" "Well, because I'm stuck, sir." "How did you get on the roof in the first place?" "I climbed up, sir." "What did you climb up for?" "I can't remember." The father was so furious with Billy, he paid no attention to me. If Father Wilhelm ever asked me why Billy was up on the roof, I couldn't give him any other reply than, "God knows," and he would have most probably given me a thrashing for blasphemy. But everybody seemed to respect me for being the only one who was willing to go and help Billy. I was the only one who wasn't afraid to be hit by the priests. One day, a new boy arrived at the school. He picked on everyone, trying to find his place in our ranks, trying to find himself at the top of the pile, superior to all below him. I didn't pay him much attention until he started to pick on a student, a youngster I had never spoken to before, with dyslexia. He was confused, fragile and terrified, and didn't know how to respond to the bully. I told the bully if he didn't apologize and bugger off, I was going to only be half responsible for my actions. I told him once, he didn't listen. I told him twice, he pushed me aside. I told him thrice, and he gobbed on my shoe. I broke his nose and was given a partial black eye. We both received 2 weeks' detention, but I didn't care. He had it coming. And while I don't believe in violence, there were certain things I was not willing to put up with. I don't like bullies. They feel the need to push people beneath them in order to make themselves feel greater. I wouldn't have minded so much if he just looked towards me, but there was no justification for treating someone as that little boy he treated. So I warned him. Wasn't enough. So I punched him. My grandmother was terrified that I would now be pestered continuously by this twat, and it would ruin my studies for the rest of the year. My grandfather cheered me. He was proud of me for what I did, standing up for the boy. And on my holiday in Easter, bought me my first beer and chatted to me about the essentials of being above the crowd, but for the crowd. After the fight, my Latin religious studies tutor, Father Wilhelm, avoided me for a period. I had gone down in his books, as he did not approve of violence of any kind, and was one of the few tutors who hated to use the cane. But I told him, pacifism only succeeds so far, and that there were some things in life I was not willing to stand for. He soon started speaking to me again on Homer, Aristotle, Aquinas, and Augustine, and while I do not think he agreed with what I did, he, to some degree, believed it was right, and it was not done with a mean heart. A new nun had arrived at the school, Sister Susanna. She was 23 years old, who taught English literature and language. I was still recovering from my bruised eye, but she would glance at me while she was giving the lesson. She seemed almost intrigued by me. She said I stood out from the rest of my classmates. I began staying after class, asking her questions on texts. At first, it didn't seem at all unorthodox. She was very pleasant, and seemed genuinely happy to see a student taking an active interest in the subject she was teaching. She smiled a lot, and was very considerate about my eye, asking if it hurt, if the swelling was going down, and she told me she admired me for standing up for the little boy who was being picked on. And even though she didn't approve of the actions, she was glad to see someone took action at all. I never really gave her much thought. I was just fascinated by her lessons, and she was an interesting person to speak with and discuss ideas with. It wasn't until she began acting very peculiar around me that she really drew my attention. She wouldn't smile as much. She would try and avoid me, it seemed, and whenever I asked her to help me with a particular text, she would say she was busy or make up some excuse. I thought it must have been that she was annoyed by my constant begging for answers and questions. And so I did not give it so much thought, until one day I came to her with a line from Romeo and Juliet, but she refused to answer it. I needed to speak to someone about this, but the headmaster said Sister Susanna was probably under a great deal of pressure at work, so that in the meantime I should have just spoken to one of the classmates to understand the text I was having trouble with. This didn't satisfy me, and I felt I needed to speak to someone. Just ask them what was going on, because I didn't understand what was it that she was trying to avoid. We were obliged to go to confession each week, and even though I never really cared much for the sessions, the priest insisted that I go and confess whatever sins I had committed. But I couldn't think of what to confess, and so, instead of speaking about what I had done, I spoke of Sister Susanna and how she was treating me. I told the priest it was another girl student, rather than telling them that it was one of the sisters. He believed that I was infatuated with the girl, and told me that lust was a repentant and horrible sin, and that I should do my best to avoid such stimulants and repress whatever urges I might have, and to ask for God's forgiveness for my depravity. I felt pretty terrible, and soon started to smoke and walk through the fields in my spare time. I'd steal a packet of cigarettes from one of the fathers. I'd smoke and walk along the paths with my thoughts, looking at the wheat fields in the sun. I came across a wasp nest in a stump in the middle of the field one day, and began flicking matches at it to see if I could actually light one in midair. By accident, I set the hive on fire. The wasps flew like bullets from the hive, leaving some to roast with the stump. I was mesmerized by the sight for a brief space of time before I ran as fast as I could from the fields. The flames spread, burning and destroying the crops. As I ran, I met the farmer and warned him of the flames. He asked what I saw. Still pumping with adrenaline, I told him I saw two boys run from the fields as the fire started. He paid me £5 and I continued to run. I didn't have time to process the fact that I lied to him and set fire to the fields. I just had to run. I felt I couldn't return to the school, and so after I had run clear away from the fields, I walked into the town. It was getting dark, and I felt very cold. I lost all my bearings. It wasn't until I noticed the delivery van, which provided the school's bread, parked on the street. I said to the driver that I got lost from a nature's walk, and would he tell me how to get to the school grounds again. He gave me a lift halfway through to the school. The school lit up like a lighthouse directing ships from the cliff. I gave him the £5 and made my way on foot back to the halls. It was still bitter cold, but I knew if I was spotted by any of the tutors, I would be done for. So I decided to make my way to the dorm rooms, pretend I was bedridden. I was too sick to see the doctor. I was spotted by Sister Susanna, wet to the bone from sweat and rain, and flush from constant running. She never asked me where I had been, and I knew if I was spotted by any one of the head boys or a member of the staff, I was done for before I even had a chance to speak. She also knew this, so she took me to her room in the dorms of the Women's Institute. She sat me down on a chair and began to wash the sweat from my face. We were silent for a long time, till eventually we began to talk of what had happened. She gave me a cup of tea as I explained my story. What drew me most was the wasps, and how I saw them scutter and burn as I set their hive on fire. "Why on earth were you playing with matches for?" she asked. I was frustrated at the time. The appearance of flame somehow excited me and took away my mystery. "You shouldn't play with fire. You are very likely to get hurt." I know it was very stupid of me, but I wanted to see it for some reason. I was scared, but also excited as the flames spread across the fields and the fire was burning all the crops and wheats. I felt like saying hurrah at the dazzling blaze. "Speak to one of the fathers. That's very troubling. You shouldn't take pleasure out of seeing such a sight." "No, I can't say it is a very healthy thing to do. I was just feeling so tormented as of lately with ideas. Have you spoken to one of the fathers for aid? I confessed my sins to one the other week, but the father just made me feel more guilt-ridden than anything else, as if there was really nothing else that I could do to help alleviate my stress. It's not my place to ask what ails you, but we are all human and must deal with the burden of sins and strive for forgiveness. It takes a very disciplined mind to strive through the dark when the light is dim. It's not the sin that plagues me, but tension. Something just seems to be exhausting me all the time of late. Perhaps you're just exhausted from your studies. It is coming close to the end of term, and things have not exactly been easy for any of the students. Maybe you just need to stop your mind from exhausting itself on needless stress. What's been exhausting you lately? I rarely see you nowadays without the same tired and strained expression. I did not bring you here out of pity for you to ask me to confess what makes me feel tense. I'm sorry, I meant nothing by it, only concern. I just mean, it looks as if something's overwhelming you, like you're carrying heavier shackles than I do at present. I'm only a young man, but it's my view that tension is the result of an exhausting inner struggle. You're making me feel that I should fall on my knees before my sister and proclaim my fault. I'm sorry, I never meant to bring such torrid convulsion in a simple conversation. I'll go. I didn't mean to torment you. I didn't mean to disturb your peace of mind. Was the sight of me like tantalization conflicting with her inner sense of good? After she finished cleaning my brow, and I sipped the last cups of tea from my mug, she showed me to the door. She stopped for a few seconds, and I walked closer to her. She did not step back or push me away. She almost was eagerly wanting me to come closer and closer to her. She simply said to me, "Lucifer." And I walked out feeling more disgusted and appalled at myself than any time I have ever felt before, or in any confession box with any priest or any of their damn talk of hell and sin. Lucifer, once God's favourite angel, shunned, vilified and cast into the pits of hell, turned into a figure who would for all eternity be used to represent all of humanity's depravity. Why did she blame me? Blame me for all her failings, as if I stood on her shoulder, whispering into her ear, telling her to act in ways she'd find repulsive, forcing her to do what she did not want to do. I have never made anyone do anything. Never. Never, never, never. At first I tried to avoid her, but each time she walked past me, she would never evade my heart. I then tried to despise her, convince myself of how much I hated her, but this was just dishonesty to myself. So I tried to destroy her. I would go to confession and tell my infatuation to the priest over and over again, thinking if I said it enough and made enough people hear how much she clouded my mind, the image of her would eventually grow old and wither in my head, and the words would turn to ash in my mouth. But it had quite the opposite effect. I would spend long afternoons contemplating on seeing her. Each time I spoke to the priest, the more and more I must have sounded possessed by Lilith. One night, I was asleep on my belly, and I felt the hot sting of metal searing the skin on my back. It frightened the life out of me. But before I passed out from the sheer pain of the hot iron, I screamed like the pigs from my dreams, which hung from the ceiling with the blood pouring from their necks. For a short period I wondered if it was not really a nightmare from my childhood, and I had become the pig or the beast, a burden in torment. My lungs burst from my shrieks, but I couldn't move. I was so terrified. I awoke 3 days later in the infirmary with 2 large diamond marks on my shoulder blades, as if 2 wings had been ripped from my back. I was told an intruder entered my unknown reason or means into the school, whom no one had seen flee. In a mad frenzy attacked me in my sleep. No one claims to have witnessed the attack, but that was the official report given to the police. I haven't the faintest idea what really happened that night, and I was never told the full story of events. I'm not even sure if the priests and nuns believed it was an insane criminal. I heard rumors hissing in the halls of the school that the Holy Spirit visited me in the night and made sure I'd never enter into the gates of heaven. All my peers and the small children who once looked up to me avoided me like the plague. I never saw Susanna again. I was told that during the 3 days I was lying unconscious, she had left the school and travelled to a project in Africa, Kenya or Cuba. We were all told that she had felt a calling elsewhere And just like that, she was gone, and I had the marks to remind me forever of her absence, permanently engraved on my back. Some days I think in a fit of madness she did it to me, feeling the judgmental eyes of the priests on her, knowing I had told them every one of my desires, drove her to the edge of her insanity, and in an attempt to free herself, burned my very flesh, and in exchange for her freedom from prosecution, she was offered an escape abroad. Other days, I think it was one of the priests I confessed to, who in an effort to save my soul attacked me in the middle of the night to give me an idea of what lay before me in hell, if I did not change my ways. I don't even know if it wasn't me, if I did not burn myself in my own sleep to finally rid myself of the guilt. And I felt as if I should, deserved to be damned.